My next guest has worked in official capacity for the United States government, capturing every single word that Joe Biden uttered while he was vice president of the United States. A fascinating job, but his proximity has really given him some insight into who this man is. And now he has a new book that says it's time to impeach and imprison Joe Biden. Joining me now is the author of The Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil Substack and the author of the book The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden, Mike McCormick. Mike, great to have you back with us, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. It's great to be on with you.
It's a wild time we're living through, and we're all trying to make sense of who Joe Biden is and what he's doing to our country. But your experience with him, I've often called upon because you've done a good job of explaining who he is and what it's like to work so closely with him. Now you've written this book. This is a big step.
That's right. And you know what? You're in the book. You know, the book has three parts. The first part is a very close examination of the Hunter Biden laptop in a timeline. And then cross-referencing it with what I know of Joe Biden when I accompanied him to Ukraine several times. Then the second part is an examination of what he did with Honduras when he was basically selling our southern border to cartel-affiliated government officials in Honduras. They were smuggling tons of drugs into our country at the time, and Joe Biden was sending them millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And that's what's led to this disaster at our southern border. And then the third section of that is why I can't testify to this in front of other entities like Congress or David Weiss. And you were in that section. You've been helping me get the word out, so that's where I put you in.
We talked about that because you provided information to the U.S. Attorney, David Weiss. You tried to, and you were met with basically indifference.
That's right. And now he's a special counsel, David Weiss. He should have me in front of his grand jury because I'm an eyewitness to these crimes that Joe Biden committed. And some of the crimes are on video. And I've discovered sort of a long overlooked video, a White House video, that has Joe Biden committing a crime as he walks up the steps of Air Force Two.
What does the video reveal?
The video is in a chapter that I titled Joe Biden Changed U.S. Policy for Burisma. And basically what happened is there was in the laptop, there are emails that as of August 2015, the then mayor of Kyiv, a guy named Vitaly Klitschko, who was closely aligned with the Maidan Revolution. He was a guy who pushed the revolution with the help of the U.S. government, became a member of the Burisma board. He was a member of a offshoot of theirs called Burisma Geothermal. Well, Hunter Biden was his supervisor. He was the chairman of that board. So that's August 2015. Fast forward to early November 2015, and the Burisma guys are worried that they're getting a lot of pressure from the government. They're being investigated by this guy Shokin, the prosecutor general, Victor Shokin, who was later fired by Joe Biden. So they sent an email to Hunter Biden on November 3rd. And he gets this email, and they're saying, we want deliverables. We need a high-ranking government official to come to Ukraine by the end of November. Well, a month later, not the end of November, but the first week of December, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine as ordered. It's almost like a paint-by-numbers corruption set. He's following exactly what they wanted him to do. And so he sets up this trip. It's announced 2 weeks after this this email. And then he's on his way to Ukraine. As they're planning this trip in early December of 2015, there's a board meeting, a Burisma board meeting in Dubai. And we know this because Devin Archer testified in front of the Oversight Committee and told them. And one of the things he told them was, I was at that board meeting. Hunter was at that board meeting. There were other executives of Burisma at that board meeting. He didn't name them all. And Hunter Biden called Joe on the phone, and they talked to him from the middle of that board meeting. That's 3 days before he walks down this Air Force Two ramp and meets Vitaly Klitschko. If Klitschko was at that board meeting and Joe Biden said, I want you to be my greeter on Air Force Two, that means that entire trip, 2015 trip that Joe Biden took to Ukraine was a crime because he did it not for the U.S., not for American interests, but for his personal interest to protect Burisma.
Well, there's no question, of course, this is not even up for dispute in any capacity, that the Biden family was very much enriched by Burisma, wasn't it?
No question about that. And, Hunter was on the board. He was getting money. I put a lot of stuff in my book about potentially Joe Biden being bribed out of a trip he took into Cyprus. Some new information I have in there. It's not definitive, but that's the same trip that he took. He also went to Romania, and the Oversight Committee has definitely tagged him with committing, personal enrichment with government officials out of that trip he took to Romania. That was in April of 2014. So their association with Burisma, the Biden family association with Burisma, with this guy Klitschko, and with enriching themselves goes back to April 2014, and it goes through this trip in December 2015.
Who knew
and
Vitaly Klitschko?
Right
who knew Vitaly Klitschko of all people would be sucked into this saga? I mean, Klitschko, I think a lot of people think of him as just a famous boxer, but now the mayor of Kiev, and also now, obviously, as you point out, Mike, a very important character in the Burisma corruption timeline.
That's right. And I went to the New York Post with this information. Stephen Nelson at the New York Post and Miranda Devine wrote a great article.
Some of the best reporters in our business.
Exactly. And they dug into this, and they looked at this video. And their writing came out January 7th and 8th, just about a couple of weeks ago. And what they said was, they called Klitschko. He denied that he was on the board. But they've also talked to other sources who said, oh, no, he was central. He was a main component of the board. So they've looked into it. Their reporting is pretty substantial. And they went to they went to Senator Johnson, and they said, we need to look into this more. So this needs to be dug into, this Klitschko relationship with Burisma and Klitschko relationship with the Biden crime family.
Can I ask you, in your time both with Joe Biden and certainly traveling with him around the world, was it ever evident to you that he was acting in a corrupt manner when you were working with him in person? Or are you able to stitch this together now with the benefit of hindsight, the release of the Hunter Biden laptop? At what point did you realize there was more than meets the eye with this guy?
There's a lot in the book. You told me something a couple phone calls ago. You said, when you get transcripts and they're not published, tell us about it. So I started looking at that. And to answer your question quickly, it was, I didn't understand what Joe Biden was doing when I was watching it. I just knew he was unpresidential. After diving into the Hunter Biden laptop, I know there's criminal activity there. And when I went to Honduras with him in 2012, what he did there was very suspicious. And I knew it was suspicious at the time, but it was just sort of, I was in the job, and I just sort of was like, this is what they told us.
Yes.
Now in hindsight, looking at other evidence, this was the beginning of him starting a relationship with cartels that now run our southern border. And so that's where these crimes came from. They came out of what he was doing. And the invisible hand behind it all is Barack Obama. And I put, a lot of examples in my book about what Barack Obama was doing behind Joe Biden. And that's why I wrote the book, is because, I told you this past couple phone calls ago. You asked me, have you been interviewed by anybody in Congress? And I said, I'm nothing to report on that at this time. Well, at this time, I'm reporting yes. In the book, I reveal I was interviewed by investigators from the Oversight Committee and from the Senate Homeland Security Government Affairs Committee. And that was back in April and May. And my concern was, as their investigation went on, they knew what I knew. I didn't have access to this video at that time, so I didn't understand that piece of the puzzle. So I didn't tell them that information. But they knew what I knew about going with Joe on various trips and things, and being a witness to crimes that he was committing. And they didn't seem interested in it. They didn't want me to testify in front of them. I offered, and they said no. So some of the information they gave me was real helpful. But I wrote the book because I think they were focusing only on the Biden crime family, and there's a huge conspiracy of other government officials in there. The embassy in Ukraine was very involved. Ambassador Pyatt, Victoria Nuland, who was Assistant Secretary of State. They're both at the bottom of the steps when they meet Joe Biden and he meets Klitschko. They're standing right there. They're all part of this process to get rid of this Shokin Shokin prosecutor who's looking at Burisma.
Victoria Nuland is a character that doesn't get a ton of scrutiny. She is technically the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs of the United States, and some people call her Toria Nuland. And she's how important of a figure is she in this entire saga?
I think she was critical to the cover up into the State Department. I don't think Kerry had a ton to do with it, but I think he knew what was going on with it. There's another State Department official, a guy named Amos Hochstein, who was central to working with Joe and Burisma.
Right.
He was on the plane back and forth. He was on this trip in 2015. And one of the things I reveal in the book was after we left that airport that evening, there was a late night dinner at a restaurant in Kyiv that was hosted by Ambassador Pyatt. Joe Biden wasn't there, but Hochstein was there. Victoria Nuland was there. Kate Bedingfield, Joe Biden's communications director, was there, and she's the one who said, "You got to come and do a transcript of this." So I walked in. I listened to the ambassador's speech. He was giving the speech to members of the press who were traveling with him then. It was New York Times' Peter Baker and Margaret Talib, who was then of Bloomberg.
Right.
And they were at the table, and they basically laid out their case for why we're getting rid of Shokin. And that was part of the process. They had this trip. They pulled the press in. The press reported exactly as they were told. It was basically Biden propaganda. And that became the official word of what was going on with Shokin.
It's not a small thing. I'm going back to the cover of your book now. The title is The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. We're speaking with Mike McCormick, again, who worked for the United States government, was wrote down, he was a stenographer for Joe Biden as he was vice president of the United States. The case to impeach and imprison Joe Biden, that's not a small thing to call for that for a president of the United States. I mean, how much kind of thought and care went into finally deciding that, yeah, you think that this president deserves that outcome?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. But it developed over time. I wrote a lot of the book was put out in my Substack. And as the momentum behind what I was reporting in my Substack was making its way into more and more media, you guys were reporting it, other outlets were reporting it.
Right.
I realized this is really significant. And, when I saw that video, I was like, this is what they were doing. This is the crime that he committed. This is him committing a crime on a White House video. You can't claim that's Russian disinformation. That's them. He's stupid enough to videotape himself doing a crime. You got to write a book about this guy.
One on that Russian disinformation line this week, we got a new headline on that subject because the Biden administration, the Justice Department, finally confirmed the FBI, as of course had the laptop for a long time and had known it was authentic and it belonged to Hunter Biden, thus ending for the 6 millionth time the stupidity of that entire saga. But Joe Biden and the people around him have lied about that a lot, even suggesting that it was likely Russian disinformation, what was on the laptop. But that was Joe Biden himself during the 2020 debates. Did you get the sense? I mean, but Biden has a career of lying behind him. When you were with him, was there ever a moment where you're rolling your eyes and going, man, that guy's telling a whopper as you write down the words he's saying?
Yeah, pretty much all the time. I mean, it was really hard to be a stenographer for him. I had been a stenographer for Vice President Cheney before him. So I had something to measure him against, not only his behavior, but just sort of his facts. And the lies that came out of him were just constant, and it was sort of a clever way of changing the wording. So the average listener would go, oh yeah, that's what they did. But when he says they, he meant other people than him, and he included himself in it. So, it's just sort of this including himself in activities that were good that made him look good, and then disincluding himself from things that made him look bad. Like when he walks down in this video, when he walks down to talk to Klitschko, he never uses his name. He introduces, he goes, I'm going to talk to the mayor of Kyiv, who's also a world champion boxer. But he never says his name. And that's something I talk about a lot in the book is that some of the other co-conspirators in this Biden-Burisma kickback scheme, they went out of their ways not to name them in their emails and in their personal communications. And so, that's what Joe's always done. But
yes.
If you listen to his words in between the lines, you hear the lies and see the crime.
Sure. You know, the name thing, though, I'm not fully convinced that that's just a cover up. I think he just honestly forgets everybody's name. He recently he was talking about some old, you know, he went to a black church, he said, when he was young, and he forgot the name of the pastor at the black church, and he was just riffing on stage, trying to dance around it. It's like, it's also ridiculous, but
right.
That's Joe Biden. All right, the book is The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. The author, Mike McCormick, who worked with him. Mike, thank you as always for your time today. Really appreciate that, and congratulations on the book. Thank you.